The light from the high windows filtered through the glass walls of the conference room, casting long reflections across the polished marble floor. The air smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Amara Lewis sat straight in her chair, hands folded neatly on the table before her, her resume placed precisely where the interviewers could see it. She had chosen her navy blue suit carefully that morning, professional, calm, commanding respect without demanding it. Her heart beat steady, though she could sense the skepticism in the room the moment she had walked in. Across from her sat 4 people, the executive panel. At the center, Mr. Donovan Reed, the company's chairman and self-made millionaire, looked her up and down with that practiced air of someone who thought he'd seen everything. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his cufflinks gleaming like small mirrors under the LED lights. He leaned back in his chair, flipping through her resume lazily, his expression an unreadable blend of amusement and disbelief. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Miss Lewis, you claim you speak 6 languages?" His tone carried that casual challenge of a man who didn't quite believe what he was hearing. Amara smiled politely. "Yes, sir. English, French, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish, and Swahili." The room shifted subtly. One of the male directors chuckled under his breath. Another raised his eyebrows, whispering to the HR head, "6 languages? Is she auditioning for the UN or a logistics firm?" They all laughed quietly. Amara didn't. Reed smirked, setting her resume down. "That's impressive if it's true, but I have to be honest, we don't really need a translator here. This is a business about numbers and deals, not words." His voice trailed off as if he expected her to agree. "With respect, Mr. Reed," she said softly but firmly, "numbers may close deals, but words build the bridges that make those deals possible." The laughter died down. Reed's smirk faded slightly, replaced by mild surprise at her composure. He hadn't expected her to answer that quickly or that calmly. She didn't fidget, didn't look away. Her eyes held his evenly, not defiant but unshaken. He crossed his arms. "You've got confidence. That's good. But this isn't a language school. We deal with international clients who care about results. If you're hired, you'll be starting small. Data sheets, correspondence reviews, maybe some translation scraps if something comes up." Amara nodded. "I understand, sir. But whatever task you assign, I'll make sure it contributes to those results you care about." Reed studied her for a moment, as if trying to find a crack in her conviction. He couldn't. Her calm confidence unsettled him slightly. It reminded him of something he'd lost long ago, belief in one's own potential before the world taught you to doubt it. "Well," he said finally, standing up, "let's see if your languages can make us money. Miss Lewis, you'll hear from HR soon." Amara rose, shook his hand firmly, and smiled. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Reed. I plan to stay long enough to prove that they can." As she left the room, the executives exchanged glances, still amused. But Reed found himself watching her through the glass door as she walked away, her steps measured and purposeful. There was something in the way she carried herself, something that told him this wasn't the last time she'd surprise him. A week into her new job, Amara quickly learned how things worked at Global Link Enterprises. The corridors were sleek, the people polite, and the hierarchy clear. She sat at a small desk near the corner of the communications floor, surrounded by chatter about numbers, deadlines, and clients spread across 3 continents. Most of her assignments were menial: editing emails, reviewing drafts, and correcting translation mistakes made by expensive consultants who, ironically, didn't speak a word of the languages they claimed to know. Still, Amara worked quietly, carefully, never complaining. She was waiting, observing, listening. One morning, the calm rhythm of the office shattered. Doors slammed, voices rose, and people rushed in and out of the conference room like a storm had swept through. Amara glanced up from her screen as she overheard fragments of conversation. "They're pulling out. Middle Eastern partners furious. Cultural offense. Deal dead." Within minutes, the whispers turned into panic. She turned to a colleague. "What's happening?" The woman sighed. "The big deal. Global Link's $120 million partnership with Al Medina Logistics. It's collapsing. Something about an insult in one of the official proposals. The board's losing their minds." Amara frowned. "An insult?" "Yeah," the woman said, shaking her head. "They think one of our Arabic translations sounded condescending. But we used professional translators. Still, the client's furious and refusing to take calls. Before anyone could stop her, Amara stood up and walked toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see Mr. Reed pacing, red-faced, surrounded by anxious executives. The translator they'd hired sat pale and silent at the table. Reed slammed his hand down. "We can't afford this mess. We're days away from signing, and now they're walking away over a few words." Amara knocked softly on the glass door. The room turned to her in surprise. "Miss Lewis," Reed said, irritation flickering in his voice. "We're in the middle of something." "I know, sir," she said, "but I believe I can help." Reed let out a short laugh. "You? You're a junior assistant. What could you possibly do?" Amara stepped closer. "May I see the translated proposal?" The translator hesitated but slid the papers toward her. She scanned them quickly, her eyes narrowing at a single line. "Here," she said, pointing. This phrase, "We expect compliance with our operational standards," was translated to mean we demand obedience to our superiority. It's not just a bad translation, it's insulting. The client felt disrespected. Reed frowned. "And you're sure about that?" Amara looked up, steady and calm. "Yes, because I speak Arabic." The room went silent. Someone muttered, "She's the one who said she speaks 6 languages." Reed exhaled, half amused, half skeptical. "Fine, you think you can fix this? Be my guest. They're not taking our calls anyway." Amara nodded once, sat down, and picked up the phone. "Get me their representative," she said, her voice even. The room watched as she waded through the transfer tones. When the line connected, she greeted the man in fluent, graceful Arabic, her voice warm, respectful. Everyone in the room froze. She spoke with ease, weaving empathy and professionalism into every word. Her tone softened where the original message had sounded cold. Her phrasing carried humility instead of authority. Occasionally, she switched to English to explain something to the room, then back to Arabic with perfect rhythm. After 10 minutes, the tension in her shoulders eased. The man on the other end laughed softly. She smiled. "Shukran," she said before hanging up. Amara turned back to Reed and the others. "They're willing to reopen discussions. Tomorrow morning." Reed blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, you mean it's not over?" "No, sir," she said, standing. "They just wanted respect, not negotiation. The deal isn't dead, it was just lost in translation." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Reed leaned back slowly, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Well," he muttered, "Miss 6 Languages just did what 3 senior negotiators couldn't." Amara gave a small smile. Sometimes understanding people is more profitable than talking at them. As she left the room, the executive stared after her, stunned. Reed's laughter, which had once carried mockery, now sounded more like disbelief, and a grudging respect he wasn't ready to admit. The following morning, the entire company seemed to hold its breath. Global Link's future, and its reputation, rested on the meeting that was about to begin. In the boardroom, screens glowed with international video feeds, flags of multiple countries displayed beside each participant's name. Amara stood near the head of the table, calm and composed, her notepad open but untouched. The board members whispered among themselves, unsure whether they should be relieved or anxious that a junior employee was now leading communication for a $120 million deal. Mr. Reed entered last, his suit perfectly pressed but his eyes shadowed with worry. "All right, Miss Lewis," he said under his breath, leaning closer. "They're all yours. Don't let me regret this." "You won't," Amara said simply. The screen flickered to life. On one side, the Middle Eastern representatives appeared. 3 men in tailored suits, their expressions cool and guarded. On another, the Asian partners joined, their CEO speaking Mandarin to his assistant. The European logistics branch connected last, adding a mix of French and English voices to the call. The moment the greetings began, confusion started to build. English dominated the conversation, but not everyone followed perfectly. The Arabic-speaking representative frowned. The Chinese CEO seemed impatient, and the French partner tried to translate under his breath. Amara watched for a few seconds, then quietly stepped forward. With natural grace, she greeted each group in their own language. "Assalamu alaikum," she said warmly to the Arab team. "Ni hao," she nodded to the Chinese CEO and then, turning slightly, "Bonjour à tous" to the French representatives. Her tone was flawless, her accent authentic, and her demeanor utterly respectful. For the first time, the tension on the call broke. Smiles appeared on the screens. The Arabic representative leaned forward, visibly impressed. "Miss Lewis, you speak our language?" "I do," she replied, switching seamlessly back to Arabic. "I wanted to make sure our partnership begins with mutual understanding, not confusion." The man smiled. "Then perhaps we can speak freely now." From there, Amara took quiet control of the meeting. She acted not as a translator, but as a bridge. When the Chinese CEO raised a concern about supply chain management, she translated it to English, softening the tone so it sounded constructive, not accusatory. When the European partners misunderstood a shipping clause, she switched to French and clarified the intent behind the proposal. Every time she spoke, she built trust, her words smooth and measured like a conductor guiding an orchestra through chaos. The executives at Global Link watched in awe. Mr. Reed, usually impatient during meetings, didn't say a word. His eyes followed her, fascinated by her precision. She wasn't just translating, she was connecting. At one point, the Arabic representative leaned back and said in English, "We have dealt with many companies before, but never one that truly listened." Amara smiled. "Listening is the first step to partnership," she said softly. The rest of the meeting flowed like water. Disagreements dissolved, laughter replaced tension, and by the end of the session, the virtual room was filled with genuine goodwill. The final agreement was read aloud. $120 million in shared logistics contracts spanning 3 continents. The deal was done. When the call ended, silence filled the conference room again. Reed blinked as though trying to process what he had just witnessed. His team broke into applause, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Reed finally turned to Amara. "Miss Lewis," he said slowly, "you just did what a dozen consultants couldn't do in a month." Amara smiled modestly. "No, sir. I just helped people understand each other." Reed looked at her for a long moment, his earlier arrogance now replaced by something genuine. Admiration. "Remind me," he said with a faint grin. "What did I tell you at the interview? Something about not needing a translator." Amara laughed softly. "Something like that." He nodded, exhaling deeply. "Well, consider me corrected. You didn't just translate words today, you saved this company." As the boardroom emptied, Amara stayed behind for a moment, looking at the screens that now displayed the signed digital agreement. For the first time, her name appeared in the official report as Lead Communications Coordinator. She smiled quietly to herself. The languages she had once been mocked for were now her power, and the millionaire who once laughed at her was learning a new language too. The language of respect. 2 weeks later, Global Link's headquarters buzzed with excitement. The usually polished, quiet corporate building now brimmed with journalists, camera crews, and reporters from major business networks. Banners hung in the lobby reading "Global Link expands international reach, historic $120 million deal signed." Employees hurried through the corridors, straightening their ties, adjusting microphones, and whispering about the young woman whose name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Amara stood in the wings of the large conference hall waiting for her cue. She could hear the hum of reporters outside, the flashes of cameras, the faint murmur of curiosity. Her heart raced, not from fear but from disbelief at how quickly everything had changed. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been invisible, a quiet employee at the end of the table. Now she was about to be introduced on a global stage. At the podium stood Mr. Donovan Reed. The millionaire looked different today, less smug, more thoughtful. His usual self-assured smirk had softened into something resembling humility. He glanced over his shoulder toward Amara and gave her a small nod before turning back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reed began, his voice amplified through the hall, "today, Global Link stands at the threshold of a new era. We've just finalized one of the most significant international partnerships in our company's history. An achievement that wouldn't have been possible without someone extraordinary." Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Reed continued. "A few weeks ago, I met a young woman in an interview who told me she spoke 6 languages. I laughed. The audience chuckled lightly. Reed smiled faintly, shaking his head. I thought it was a nice trick, a resume filler maybe. But then, when this company faced one of its toughest negotiations, that same young woman used those languages to save a $120 million deal and, in the process, taught me something about communication, humility, and leadership." He turned toward the wings. "Please welcome Global Link's new Director of Global Communications, Miss Amara Lewis." Applause filled the hall as Amara walked on stage. The camera flashes painted the air in bursts of white. She was dressed in a white suit that shimmered under the lights, elegant, powerful, yet understated. Reed extended his hand, and this time it was she who accepted it with calm confidence. "Congratulations," he said quietly as the applause continued. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for believing in me." Eventually, the audience laughed softly as she approached the microphone. When the noise settled, Amara looked out at the sea of faces, executives, employees, journalists, and a few curious interns who had come to witness the moment. "I'm deeply honored," she began, her voice steady and sincere. "When I first came here, I didn't expect to change anything. I just wanted to contribute. But what I've learned is that communication isn't about speaking loudly. It's about listening deeply." The crowd listened in silence. Reed nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I may speak 6 languages," Amara continued, "but what truly matters isn't how many you speak. It's how much you understand. Respect, empathy, patience, those are the universal languages that build trust. And when people feel understood, walls fall and progress happens." The room erupted into applause again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on her calm, radiant face. Reed stepped forward, smiling genuinely this time. "Miss Lewis has not only redefined communication in our company," he said, "but reminded us all that success is not built on ego. It's built on understanding." After the ceremony, Amara stood by the side of the stage as people lined up to shake her hand. Some of her old colleagues approached her with proud smiles. Others simply looked at her in awe, realizing how much they had underestimated her. A young intern whispered, "I want to be like you someday." Amara smiled warmly. "Then start by learning to listen." As the event drew to a close, Reed joined her again. The tension that had once existed between them was gone, replaced by mutual respect. He chuckled softly. "You know, I used to think money talked," he said. "But after watching you, I've realized words can be even more powerful." Amara laughed lightly, only when used with respect. They stood side by side as the last camera flashes faded. The millionaire who once laughed at her now understood the true value of her gift. And Amara, once dismissed as just another resume, had become the voice of a global company, a living proof that knowledge, grace, and humility could turn laughter into applause. Months had passed since that unforgettable press event, but the glow of that day hadn't faded for Amara Lewis. Her new office, on the top floor of Global Link's glass tower, overlooked the vast city below, a network of lights and life stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet she had once dreamed of but never imagined earning so soon. On her desk were neatly stacked folders, translation notes, and a world map dotted with pins representing every country Global Link now partnered with. She took a slow breath, sipping her coffee as she looked out the window. The skyline glittered beneath a rising sun, its light washing over her office like a promise. She smiled faintly, remembering how it had all begun, with laughter, doubt, and condescension. Mr. Reed's amused smirk from that first interview replayed in her mind like an old film reel, but that memory no longer stung. It fueled her. She had turned mockery into momentum. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she called. It was Mr. Reed. Gone was the arrogance that once cloaked him. His presence now carried quiet respect. He held 2 cups of coffee and offered her one. "Thought you might need this," he said. "Thank you," Amara replied, smiling. He sat down across from her. "You know, I've been in business for over 30 years, he began, gazing out the same window. "I've seen people close deals through power, money, even fear, but never through understanding. What you did, it changed how this company operates." Amara leaned back, listening. She had come to recognize these moments when successful men like him finally admitted that empathy, not ego, moved the world forward. Reed chuckled softly. "Funny thing is, you taught me something no MBA program ever could." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That respect isn't a currency, it's a language," Yanni said. "And I was fluent in all the wrong ones." Amara smiled, the warmth in her eyes softening his words. "You learned quickly." He laughed. "I had a great teacher." The intercom on her desk buzzed. Her assistant's voice came through. "Miss Lewis, there's a call from Nairobi. A startup founder says he heard about you through the Global Link partnership in Dubai. He'd like your advice on expanding internationally." Amara's eyes lit up. "Put him through." Reed stood, smoothing his tie. "Looks like the world's calling you now." "Maybe," she said, her smile widening. "But I'm always ready to answer." He gave a small nod before leaving her office. As the door closed behind him, she turned back to her computer, pressing the button to connect the call. "Hello," she said warmly, this time in Swahili. "It's a pleasure to speak with you." The man on the other end laughed in surprise. "You speak Swahili too?" "Yes," she replied, switching effortlessly to English, and a few more if needed. As the conversation continued, her voice moved gracefully between languages. French, for a European investor joining the line, Mandarin for a Chinese supplier who chimed in, English to tie it all together. What once made her seem unnecessary had become the company's greatest advantage. When the call ended, Amara leaned back, satisfaction settling quietly in her chest. On her desk lay several handwritten letters from clients around the world. "Thank you." Notes written in Arabic, Mandarin, French, and Swahili. Each one spoke of gratitude not just for her skill but for her kindness, her willingness to listen, and her gift for making people feel seen. Outside, the city pulsed with life, full of stories and voices in 1,000 tongues. She thought of the little girl she had once been, the one who stayed up late with foreign language tapes, fascinated by the way people could say the same thing in different ways. She had never imagined those late nights would lead her here, connecting continents through conversation. She stood by the window again, the reflection of the skyline shimmering in the glass. Her own reflection looked back at her, a woman no longer underestimated, no longer overlooked. She had built her own language of success, one word, one conversation, one act of understanding at a time. Far below, the city thrived in harmony. Different voices, different languages, one world. And in that moment, Amara realized something deeper than pride. She hadn't just closed a global deal. She had opened one, the deal between people across every border, united not by profit but by understanding. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "The world listens when you speak with respect."